Hey everyone, welcome back to BDS Suspension, where today in the shop we have this brand new 2022 Ford F-250 Super Duty. Now today we're going to show you how to install our 2-inch suspension system on this truck. As you can see on the side of this truck, it's wrapped with RCV Performance products. And we've worked with RCV over the years, and it's just been a really great relationship as we've worked together to build really hardcore off-road vehicles.
We've been manufacturing axles and CV components for over 75 years. What we do is we take a solid axle vehicle like a Jeep or Ford F-250, and we'll convert the front end to a CV shaft, and that CV will be stronger, smoother, and more efficient power delivery than a U-joint. We've partnered with BDS for a lot of builds in the past with our RCV axle shafts, so we're really excited to be able to run their product on one of our trucks.
All right guys, so without further ado, let's hand this truck over to Jordan, one of our lead techs here at BDS, and we're gonna go ahead and get this kit installed.
So here's the kit that we're installing on this particular truck today. We have our ProRide coil springs, our heavy duty radius arms, our dual steer and stabilizer kit, track bar drop bracket, as well as our Fox 2.0 Performance Series shocks. Now once you got your truck up in the air and wheels and tires off, the first step here, we're gonna remove the sway bar link nut here, just a 18mm socket. Might need a swivel on your impact. Go ahead and remove both sides of that. Once you have that other nut removed, go ahead and just push up on your sway bar and move it out of the way. Now our next step is we're gonna remove the track bar bolt here. So this is just a 30mm socket and wrench on whatever side. If you can reach it to get that nut removed with the impact, that works. But in our case, we're just gonna take our big breaker bar here, put your socket on that end, wrench on this end, and just pull towards you to loosen that. So now once you remove your track bar bolt, sometimes these track bars get stuck in the bracket, and just be careful because the axle might shift one way or another a little bit. But just go ahead and take a pry bar and just pull that track bar out of there. Now we're gonna go ahead and disconnect our brake line brackets from the axle and the frame here. This is just gonna allow a little bit more slacks when we go up and take everything apart. So 10mm socket on this bolt here on the axle side. Remove that. And on this bolt up here, go ahead and put a 13mm socket. Remove that one. Now we're just gonna remove this breather line clip here on the axle. Now on the driver's side, this vent hose here, go ahead and just pry up on that and remove that from there. Now we're gonna remove our drive shaft from our front axle here. There's just 4 bolts with these little U-straps here, 8mm socket. Remove all those. Just rotate the drive shaft. Pop it out of there. So I went ahead and put 2 axle stands underneath the axle here just to hold it up. We're gonna remove our shocks. The radius arms will hold the axle up, but you just want extra support there. So go ahead and remove your lower shock bolt. So just take an 18mm socket. Might need a swivel. Go ahead and remove that. You don't need a wrench on the back side because there is just a little nut tab there. And then you can kind of play with your stand here and see where home is for that to come out nice and easy. Like so. Now we're gonna remove our top nut on our shock here. It's a stem, so it just has a nut on it. So these are super, super tight from the factory. So you can either, if you can get a wrench in there, there's a little nut that you can hold it. Or I like to use vice grips here. Just get them nice and tight on there. Take a 21mm ratcheting wrench. Go ahead and break that nut free. You got a long ways to go, so. Now that you have your shocks removed, we're gonna go ahead and go up with our hoist and just be careful of your lines and everything. We're gonna go up to remove those front coil springs here. So go and move those up. You might get stuck on these isolators here and you'll need to reuse these so they'll stay in there. That's not a huge deal. And then just pull the spring itself out. Now we're going to loosen, do not remove, the 3 bolts holding on your radius arm. So on the front side here, you'll need a 24mm socket on the bolt head side, a 24mm wrench on the nut side. just remove that nut, leave the bolts in. You'll need a 24mm socket on the bolt head side and a 27mm wrench on the nut side. Same thing, just remove the nut. Now we're going to install our bushings on the lower part of our shock, our new Fox shock here. So just take some silicone spray, spray the bushings and the sleeves, and also just spray the eyelet on the shock itself. Take your bushing first. Go ahead and just press this in. You can use a hammer or a vise if you have that, or you can just whack them in however you want to whack them in. Just make sure that there's center, so the same distance on each side here. And then the sleeve should just slide in, but if it doesn't, just press it in. Make sure that it's flush with each side. Do that for the next one. If you try to put your sleeve in before you push your bushings in, it'll be really tough because it won't let that bushing flex. Just pop it in, and you're good. Now before we remove our radius arms, we're gonna go ahead and install our new Fox shocks. So here we give you 2 little washers and then 2 bushings. So go washer foot first and then bushing. And then make sure that that little nub is facing up. They kind of form with each other. You can kind of see here, just sit with each other. So here, go ahead and install this shock into the truck. I'll do it the opposite way here. So do bushing and then washer and then your nut. Now we're just gonna throw our bolt in, our bottom shock eyelet here. That's just to help hold the axle up while we remove the radius arm, so you have another thing to hold it up other than just the axle stand here. Now once you got your shock hooked up and your stands underneath your axle, make sure everything's pretty secure. We're gonna go ahead and remove the radius arm. So you can either just pull it out or impact it out. Pull it out. You might have to push forward on the axle a little bit to let it escape its home. And remove this bolt here. And your radius arm is removed. Now take your newly provided radius arm and take your factory bolt from the rear here, throw it up into here, just put that on there. And you see how I installed it, that this little U cam plate part will be on the bottom here when it's on the axle. Now we're gonna take our radius arm and swing it up, and once again you might have to push forward on your axle to get it through, and then once you get it up, pull back and just line up your bolt hole. So you might have to have your camera guy push back on the axle a tad bit to line your bolt up and just slide that one in. And you're gonna leave the bottom bolt out for now. Now once you have both your radius arms installed and your lower bolts are not in, you can see how this is not lined up yet. This is just gonna adjust for your caster here. So what we need to do is we need to somehow rotate the axle so you can line your bolt up to be able to put it in. Now in this case, we have this cam washer here. This is gonna go towards the rear of the vehicle with the bolt. So to be able to get that lined up, there's a couple different ways you can do this, but the best way is you take a stand and you put it on your tie rod here and you just adjust whichever way you need to go. So as Nate can maybe show you on the axle on the bolt hole here, as you adjust up, it moves the axle so you can line that up in the correct spot. So once you think you have it close, go ahead and take your cam and slide that in there and just make sure that that cam is sitting in the slot there, and if it's not, you just have to adjust that stand to be able to put it into that slot there. Now once you get both of those installed, you can just go ahead and put your cam on the opposite side, on the inside part here. Make sure that it lines up. And then just take a washer and your nut, and you can just snug that up. Opposite side here, washer nut. So when you're tightening it, just make sure that your cams don't fall out and don't crush them. Now we're gonna go ahead and snug up those lower cam bolts here. So if you can, try and always tighten from the nut side with your socket. So take a 27mm socket, put it on that nut, 27mm wrench on your bolt head side. Make sure those cams don't come out when you're tightening. Just snug those up. On this side, you'll have to do it the other way because of the axle housing here. Now, once you have your radius arms in, we're going to remove our lower shock bolt from our eyelet here on each side. So just adjust those stands for ease of removal. And this is just going to allow us to lift the axle, the chuck up and lower the axle so we can put our new springs in. So now we're going to raise our chuck or lower our axle here. And this is going to be able to give us enough room to be able to put the new spring in. So go ahead and just go up. Watch your lines, as always. Make sure they don't get too tight. Also watch your drag link and everything. Make sure it's not too tight. Throw this in. And this spring does go in a certain way. So you'll see, obviously the bottom part is smaller and there's a stop on this part of the axle. So basically when you put it in, you can rotate it and you can feel it just catch and you'll know that it will be sitting in its right spot. So go ahead and do each side. Before I forget to explain, the factory springs comes with these isolators. Our springs on the top are the same width and everything for the isolator on the top. So you basically just find the stop on the isolator, line it up with the end of the spring and just push it in. And if you can't push it in, the vehicle itself will push it in. So just go up a little bit with the jack stand and then we'll go down with the hoist here. So now here, we'll either go up with our jack stands or down with our hoist. So once you get that spring in that little coil bucket there, you can go ahead and go down. Wait for it to seat and then just line your shock up. Now that you got your spring seated, you can either continue to go down with your hoist or up with your jack to align your lower shock bolt here. So in our case, we're just going to use the stand to adjust where we need that at. So here we got it adjusted. Just go ahead and throw your bolts in. Don't forget about your nut tabs. You might have to back your bolts off a little bit. Let's get your nut tab started. Now we're just going to tighten our top nut on our front shock here. Take a 19mm wrench. Just tighten that. Once you get it start to get pretty tight, it's going to want to spin that shock body, so you might just have to hold it to get it a little bit more tight. Just tighten this up until those bushings start to swell a little bit. Now that you got that top nut tightened, we're going to go ahead and tighten our lower shock bolt here. Just factory bolt with factory nut tab, 18mm socket. Now we're going to remove our factory track bar bracket. So up here, there is a nut tab with 3 nuts on it, and there's just these 2 bolts here. So up here, the 3 nuts with the nut tab are a 21mm socket. And now we're just gonna remove these 2 bolts here. There's a nut tab in the frame, so make sure you don't lose that in the frame. These are just an 18mm socket. Remove those and be careful, because once you remove this next one, your track bar bracket's going to want to fall down. And then those nut tabs, we'll hold that up. And you probably just have to pull it forward if the nut tab doesn't fall out. This is all that tab is. There's just 3 holes that slides into. Now this is our newly upgraded track bar bracket. So it's basically just a plug and replace type deal. Put the 3 studs from your nut tab back on. Put your 3 bolt nuts on here. That's just going to allow that track bar bracket to hold there. Then take your 2 bolts, and this part can be a little bit of a pain, and try and find those nut tabs. Same with the other side, just try to find that nut tabs home. When you put this in before you tighten it, it's kind of hard to see. There's a brake line that you can see that runs here and up. So just make sure that when you tighten that, that brake line's not sitting behind that track bar bracket, because it will pinch it and you will have braking issues. You don't want to do that. So just be very mindful of that while you're installing this. Now we're just going to tighten it up. So again, just 18mm socket for these ones. And then same with this side. And then get your 21mm socket. Now we're going to reinstall our front drive shaft. So just use your factory straps with your factory bolts. Make sure that you Loctite these bolts. Make sure that everything is sitting in its home accordingly before you hammer these down. So go ahead and just start each side. I'm going to take your 8mm socket again on your impact. Kind of go in a star pattern. Just tighten them up. And just make sure that they're all seated. And Nate can come kind of show you here. Right here, just make sure that U-joint cap is seated on each side and not popping out or anything. So you should be pretty good there. Now we're just going to reattach our brake line bracket to the axle here. Just with a factory bolt. Take your 10mm socket. Just tighten that down. Now once you got your brake line bracket on your axle mounted back up, just go ahead and put this bracket back on with the factory bolt on the frame. There's a 13mm socket. Now we're just going to hook our sway bar back up. So you might have to get underneath it and just kind of guide it in on each side. Have to bend those links to make it so it wants to slide over it. I'm going to take your factory nuts, start them up. Take your 18mm socket, tighten those down. Now for the radius arms, we offer these stainless steel BDS badges to rivet on like so. Now we don't rivet these on through our manufacturing because we are allowing you to customize them to any color that you want to, but in this case, they're just stainless steel right out of the bag. So we provide rivets, and you'll need a rivet gun to install these, so go ahead and just pop those in there. In our case, we have this air rivet gun. You can just buy a handheld one at a parts store. Now moving on to the rear, all we got to change here is our rear shocks. So on the nut side here, on the lower, it's a 21mm wrench. The back side, 18mm socket. Let's go ahead and loosen that. And same with the front, just kind of find a happy medium to pull that out. And then the top, there's just a stud with a nut. So it's just an 18mm socket with that nut. Rip that nut off. And it can be a pain. We just kind of pull back and forth on this shock to get it off. Now after your bushings are installed, go ahead and put in your shock. So just like the factory, you'll just mimic the bushing, no sleeve on the top for that stud. Use your factory nut. And then just push up to release that band. Now sometimes you may have to open up this factory bracket a little bit. It's just a little squished for the bushings. But once you do that, you can just take a hammer or a crescent wrench and pry them open. And go ahead and push up on your shock. Let it extend down. Just catch it. Put your nut on. Put your wrench on the nut side. Just same as what we did earlier, 21 with an 18. Tighten it down. And the top as well.
All right, so that is how you install our 2-inch suspension system on this 22 F250. Now, just make sure you follow your instructions exactly, as this video is just sort of a general how-to video on how to install it. We want to make sure you guys get the exact torque specifications on everything that you install. Now, this kit is a little bit different than what you would see on the base kit for our 2-inch because we have the optional radius arms, we have the dual steering stabilizer, as well as the Fox 2.0 Performance Series shocks. All of this combined, though, will definitely transform the way this truck rides, and Ricky over at RCV will be very happy when he drives this across the country. Now, for all things that you need to learn about suspension, go to bds-suspension.com, and if you want to upgrade your axles to be the absolute strongest on the planet, go to RCV Performance Products.